this website, Access Genealogy. The next part we have here is Hernando de Soto expedition. A lot of you have heard about this. At first, morale was high in this expedition, but as more and more soldiers began to be sniped off in guerrilla attacks and no wealthy city like the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was encountered, desertions occurred. Most of the deserters were Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. Again, who was deserting? Now remember, Hernando de Soto came up with 600 soldiers. A lot of those deserters were again Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. The first desertion gave an extensive discussion by the authors of De Soto Chronicles occurred in the vicinity of Saluda, North Carolina, which was then called Suale or Guale or Shuale. They've changed this with an X and they also write this with a G, Guale or Shuale. The location was on the Blue Ridge Escarpment. A high-ranking female leader from the town of Cofitachequi in southeastern South Carolina was being held hostage. She pretended to need to answer the call of nature, then escaped with one of the African servants dodged a hijack. What Africans? Alright. Portuguese Sephardic Jews. While leaving Cosa in northwest Georgia, De Soto lost at least 2 or 3 more men. Robles broke his leg when he fell off his horse and could not march. Another was Hidalgo, noble, name of Massano of Salamanca, who disappeared several days before the army departed. The other was a Moorish servant named Feriado, who intentionally slipped away from the Spaniards as they marched to the west. It is quite likely that De Soto lost several other common soldiers in the highlands because the Spaniards were enthralled with the terrain. Now you gotta understand why they're separating the Moors and they're trying to make them Africans only with the Spaniards, because they're talking about Catholic. When they say Spaniards here, De Soto, yeah, he represented the Catholic crown. And he was, even though he's a Sephardic Jew, he's a crypto. Other desertions in the region are not mentioned by the chroniclers until further along on the route. Alright, so even in the De Soto expedition, a lot of Sephardic Jews and Moors and a lot of black Europeans were being left behind. Alright, this is all before Jamestown and Roanoke, okay? All this is happening. These people are staying behind for years, alright? Before Roanoke and Jamestown, mixing with the local people. Alright, we're going to be reading right away from this book, Indian Slavery in Colonial Times Within the Present Limits of the United States. A very scholarly book from the Columbia University, Studies in History and Economics and Public Law by Alman Wheeler Lauber, PhD. We're going to get into it right now. What are they saying about Hernando de Soto? In 1539, Soto himself landed in the Bay of Espiritu Santo in Florida for the purpose of conquest. He had served under Pizarro in Peru, and his methods were those learned from his master. So remember, Hernando or Fernando de Soto, right? He was under Pizarro when they conquered the Inca. And Pizarro was ruthless, cruel. So De Soto learned from his master, it says here. To ensure success, all opposition must be overcome. So with the expedition were taken bloodhounds, chains, and iron collars for the catching of holding of Indian slaves. Again, chains and iron collars. Iron collars for who? For Indian slaves, not Africans. The Spanish were not enslaving Africans. They were enslaving American Indians. I can't emphasize this enough. You know, perspective, orientation, the true slave trade. In reverse, the expedition was military in nature. Hence, it was natural that force and conquest should precede conciliation. There is no doubt that one of the purposes of Soto was to capture Indian slaves. All right, just real quick. All right, so this was a military campaign De Soto was on, because Leon and all these other expeditions were failing and it was hard. And they saying, all right, send De Soto. He was there with Pizarro and they conquered the Incas. He should be able to conquer these people up here in North America. So they sent a military campaign. This wasn't an exploration or expedition. They called it expeditions. Most of the time, these were slave raids, military campaigns, as I just told you. All right, De Soto. who came with many Moors, De Soto himself being Sephardic Jewish Moorish as well. Crypto, convert, converso, new Christian. He had chosen as his lieutenant a rich resident of the town of Trinidad in Cuba, Vasco Porcayo de Figueroa, who had come to Florida with the object of obtaining Indian slaves for his estates. All right, so remember, De Soto came in with 600 soldiers. All right, 600 soldiers. This included Moranos, Moriscos, black conquistadors too, not just Spanish white-looking Europeans. Soto himself was a slave owner. Among his possessions in Cuba were Indian slaves, whom he employed as herdsmen and in getting gold. In some cases, the Indian chiefs through whose territories Soto and his men were passing, everywhere they were passing, De Soto and his 600 men through their expedition in North America, all the way to the Mississippi from Florida. At other times, both men and women were taken by force. Narrators relate the capture and distribution of such women in groups of 100 to 300 American Indian women enslaved. Among the captives were a queen and a cacique. Real quick, we're in the National Park Service website, nps.gov, an article here about Hernando de Soto, since we're talking about, and again, 1539, Hernando de Soto, a veteran of Spanish conquest in Peru, landed on Florida coast with a fleet of vessels, a contingent of 600 men and 300 horses, a herd of pigs, some mules, bloodhounds, many weapons, and a large store of supplies. Again, remember, this is a military campaign. His goal was to conquer and settle the territory of the Gold States, as well as find gold to enrich himself and his king. De Soto had no interpreter or guide, but he soon found a Spaniard living with a local tribe of Indians who, they were already there. His name was Juan Ortiz. They called him a Christian, and the primary sources, right, he was a converso, a native of Sevilla, all right? He was a Moor who had belonged to the 1528 expedition of Panfilo de Narvaez Ortiz, and 3 other men became the captives of a chief named Usita, who intended to kill them in retaliation for offenses Narvaez had committed. Ortiz survived by the intervention of the chief's daughter, who later aided his escape to a more hospitable village. While other Spaniards traded with the Indians, De Soto stole what he wanted, including precious stores of corn. He abducted Indian women for his soldiers and forced native men to haul his supplies. Remember, he was taking 100 to 300 women groups. All right, and look what he was doing for his soldiers. What were they doing with them? He humiliated chiefs by kidnapping them as guarantee for safe passage through their territory. As a final symbol of conquest, he planted Christian crosses in village plazas or atop the Indian sacred mounds. The army spent the winter near Tallahassee, Florida, then set off on a journey that marked the first entry of Europeans into the interior of the present-day southeastern United States. As De Soto's army entered the current region of southern Georgia, it was forced to cross a major river, likely the Flint. Spring rains had swollen the waterways to dangerous levels, but De Soto saw no alternative route. The army built a barge that they had pulled back and forth across the river, using a chain strung between the 2 shores. Twice the chain broke and the barge bounded out of control. Somehow, everyone crossed and the expedition headed north. Near the end of March, they reached the vicinity of present-day Macon, Georgia, possibly near the Lamar site. One native guy named Perico told the Spanish to travel 4 days east to find gold. Local Indians warned De Soto that to the east he would risk starvation on a large patch of uninhabited land. De Soto, lured by the promise of finding gold, chose to follow Perico's advice. Just as they had been warned, they found no people, food, or gold. The terrain was so desolate, they derided it as the desert of Ocute. All right, the Ocute chiefdom. Okay, we're going to read about them. On the 5th day, they reached the Savannah River, swollen from spring rains, making crossing treacherous. Mounted soldiers rode across the water, lapping at the horse stirrups and saddlebags. The foot soldiers linked arms in a human chain, 30 to 40 feet long, and slowly pulled themselves across the raging river. Exhausted but safe on the other side, they faced another crisis. They were running out of food. De Soto ordered everyone to move faster, increasing their pace from 17 to 30 miles a day. They encountered more flooded rivers and often had to halt to build barges in order to cross. In late April, the soldiers reached the location of present-day Columbia, South Carolina. They were hopelessly lost. An Indian war chief, Patofa, and his warriors accompanied the Spanish, but they were little help as guides. Their goal was to find and fight their enemies, from a chieftain called Cofitachequi. So this Patofa is from the Ocute, or later known Altamaha or Latama, sometimes known conventionally as the Oconee province, was a Native American paramount chiefdom. The Oconee Valley area was populated for thousands of years, and the court chiefdoms of Ocute emerged following the rise of the Mississippian culture around 1100. Ocute was invaded by the expedition of the Spanish conquistador Hernan de Soto. All right, that's what we're talking about. In 1539, at that time, Ocute was locked in a long-standing war with the rival paramount chiefdom of Cofitachequi in present-day South Carolina. Okay, so they're gonna tell you this is what I'm saying. They actually joined up. All right, these people, this chiefdom, joined up with De Soto. They wanted to go to war with their enemies, their rivals, the Cofitachequi. A little bit more down, it says the people of Ocute spoke a language later known as Jamasi, apparently Muscovian tongue that may have been similar to Hichiti. All right, so let's go back. So these same people, right? They're saying an Indian war chief Patofa and his warriors accompanied, right, the Spanish or Hernan de Soto, but they were little help as guides. Their goal was to find and fight their enemies. All right. The Indians were as lost as the Spanish. On April 25th, a scout led the army to the village of Aimei, on the outskirts of the immense Cofitachequi chiefdom that controlled most of what today is the eastern half of South Carolina, as well as parts of North Carolina. The war chief Patofa and his followers raided several villages, looted and desecrated temples, and killed and scalped their captives. This is what they did with the help of the Spanish. They were waiting. They took the opportunity. Their lust for battle satisfied, the Indians left for home. That's all they wanted to do. De Soto made his way to the chiefdom headquarters, reportedly near Camden, South Carolina. He camped on one side of a river and summoned a woman chief. All right, again, yeah, there was a woman chief over there. That was who their rivals were, a woman chief named the Lady of Cofitachequi by the Spanish. She invited the strangers to her village, where she presented De Soto with gifts of animal pelts, blankets, pearls, salt, venison, and other food, and a cordial welcome and ceremony. De Soto demanded gold and silver, but was shown only copper and mica. As a result, he and his soldiers stormed to the top of a sacred mount and ransacked the temple. You hear that? Again, Hernan de Soto, Sephardic Jew. They found ornate chests containing the bones of honored ancestors, as well as animal skins, furs, and pearls. The Spanish stole everything valuable they could carry, then kidnapped the Lady of Cofitachequi and headed north. They climbed through the mountains of North Carolina, where the Lady of Cofitachequi managed to escape with some of the stolen pearls. All right? She actually did that by pretending she had to go to the bathroom. I have a lot of the primary sources translated in a great book I'm going to show you guys right now. So if you guys want to get the full accounts of that, great book right here says The Discovery and Conquest of Terra Florida by Don Fernando de Soto and 600 Spaniards, his followers. Who are these Spaniards, so-called Spaniards? A lot of these are Moors, Sephardic Jews. Believe that. Written by a gentleman of Elvis, employed in all the action and translated out of Portuguese. He was there, a primary source. Elvis was there. He saw everything, and he wrote it in Portuguese. All right, who was he? A Portuguese, Iberian, by Richard Haglio, reprinted from the edition of 1611. Okay, so make sure you get that. All that story is in here. You guys can read all that of Fernando Soto, what he was doing. So again, we go back to Axis genealogy. And they were talking about Hernan de Soto's expedition as one of the examples of Moors being left behind. All right? Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. Most of the deserters, all right, deserters of Hernando's expedition were Moorish or sub-Saharan servants.